Chapter 621 Critical Question. Bai Zemin. As Bai Zemin regretted over the misfortune and wondered how to appease those who were fighting in the hope of seeing their loved ones again but still raising their weapons for his cause, the soft voice of Wu Yijuan's mother served to bring him out of the gloom in which he found himself. Yes? Sun Ling did not know what Bai Zemin was thinking, she had no way of knowing. But in fact, it wasn't hard for an observant woman like her to notice that when the crush of her daughter opened the notebook and saw the contents, his shoulders slumped weakly and the sparkle in his eyes dimmed noticeably. Maybe it was for that reason and because he was the person her daughter loved, but Sun Ling couldn't help wishing to lift his spirit a little. I know that there are not enough words to ease the pain and that no matter what word it is can never truly soothe the death of a person. However, I am sure that your fallen comrades would definitely not blame you for the deaths or disappearances of their loved ones. Sun Ling said with a comforting smile on her face. You are only a little over 20 years old, but you managed to travel thousands and thousands of miles in the midst of this world where death lurks around every corner. I'm sure there were more than a few times when the weight on your shoulders caused your knees to weaken. But, even then you did not give in. Look at you now, didn't you keep your promise? You led your team safely this much. Now, instead of mourning for those who are not here, wouldn't it be better to think about how to help those in need? Bai Zemin looked at the woman in front of him and sighed in his heart. Without realizing it, he couldn't stop 5 words from escaping his mouth. I am sorry, Aunt Sunday. You're sorry? Sun Ling blinked. Why are you apologizing to me? No, it's nothing. Bai Zemin shook his head after regaining his composure. There was no way he could tell her that he was apologizing because while she and her family were showing him kindness, he was thinking of how to usurp leadership from them. Even if after taking over everything Bai Zemin bestowed upon the Wu family an unshakable position within his government, it was a fact that he was a rule usurper. But in fact, Bai Zemin did not regret about this fact. He regretted because he knew that all goodness and goodwill would most certainly fade away once the truth was revealed. Just at that moment, and as Meng Qi and Wu Yijuan continued whispering quietly words that only the two of them could hear, another person appeared in the doorway of the spacious living room. Oh? What a surprise! Everyone looked toward the entrance and immediately found Wu Keqian taking off his coat, proof that he had clearly just arrived home. Besides, judging by the tired expression on his face, it seemed that he had a lot of work recently which had kept him from sleeping properly. Uncle Wu, how are you? Bai Zemin stood up out of respect as he wondered what kind of situation was causing a second-order soul evolver to be so tired. The reason Bai Zemin respected Wu Keqian was because the man was not only Wu Yijuan's father but also because he had somehow or other helped his family. Moreover, even though Bai Zemin had yet to tour the base, from what he had seen so far it looked like Wu Keqian was a ruler of good quality, another reason why Bai Zemin respected the man. Oh, young friend. I wish I were better. Wu Keqian smiled bitterly and turned to his daughter to greet her. Wu Yijuan seemed calmer about the sentimental situation in which her family had become embroiled and of which Bai Zemin had learned 2 days ago thanks to his father casually mentioning it. She greeted her father with a kiss on the cheek and even smiled without pressure, proof that she was really getting better at accepting that times had changed. Wu Keqian greeted his wife with a gentle kiss on the lips and Sun Ling even responded with a light caress on his face, much to the relief of Wu Yijuan who upon seeing the interaction between her parents smiled brightly. Bai Zemin was also relieved to see that everything seemed fine at least on the surface. Honestly, he didn't mind polygamy or monogamy as long as all parties involved accepted it. If everyone accepted it willingly and could be happy, why would they have to worry about what people would say? Screw society's thoughts, a society that no longer existed as a whole. Young lady, it's you. Ha ha ha, it really is fate. To think that you were actually this Bai Zemin guy's younger sister. Wu Keqian looked really happy about seeing Meng Qi. Mayor Wu, how are you? Meng Qi replied with a respectful expression on her face. Stop, stop calling me mayor anything. Wu Yijuan's father waved his hand and said in a self-mockery voice, just call me Uncle Wu, child. My title as mayor of Chongping district is just an empty title that has no use for anything now. At most, it could only be used to transmit the radio signal, but with the electricity out it's not even good for that anymore. Meng Qi only smiled slightly in response and didn't comment further on the matter. Being honest with herself, Meng Qi knew that while she respected and in a way was grateful to Wu Keqian, she was also slightly disgusted. However, Meng Qi also knew that the current world order was no longer the same as in the past and it was questionable if it would ever be again, so the matter of Sun Jia could only be ignored as much as possible. Father, did something happen? Wu Yijuan asked once her father took a seat. Wu Keqian sighed and as he took a sip of the tea Sun Ling poured for him he nodded. 2 days ago, one of our unmanned drones found a city under construction about 1,500 kilometers from our current position in a northerly direction. According to reports, the number of survivors working is at least a few thousand, so we can assume that it is a faction with considerable power. What? The eyes of Sun Ling widened in shock and she couldn't help but point out in disbelief. But how can such a thing even be possible? Didn't we unite all the small factions in the north under our rule after wiping out the bandits who abused of their power? Due to her disbelief, Sun Ling did not notice that the expression of the 2 young people sitting in front of her changed slightly, as well as that of her daughter sitting next to her. The same was true for Wu Keqian as due to mental fatigue at the possibility of a powerful enemy did not allow him to be aware of his surroundings as he continued to explain in a low voice. Worst of all, our drone was destroyed before it could pick up more about the other party and all the scouts we sent afterward did not return even now. Bang! Sun Ling slammed the wooden table in front of her and without realizing how much strength she was using the table exploded into thousands of tiny fragments. The splinter flew everywhere and the maidservants outside the room jumped in fright. How dare they? Sun Ling's voice was quite scary, much more dangerous than when she was talking to Bai Zemin and the others. Those bandits. They are surely no different from all the others who force the weak to work for a measly piece of bread or slaughter anyone who doesn't move their hands fast. Calm down, Ling. Wu Keqian took his wife's hand and shook his head. There is no use in grumbling. Wu Yijuan looked at Bai Zemin worriedly while Meng Qi quickly calmed down as she saw that her big brother's expression was composed after hearing and witnessing all this. Meng Qi knew Bai Zemin practically like the back of her hand. Even before the apocalypse, there was nothing he couldn't accomplish when he set his mind to it, let alone the current him. Wu Yijuan was worried because now that the transcendent faction had been found it was highly probable that with her parents' personalities a battle would break out soon, and this was precisely what she least wanted to happen. Actually, it seems that the other side does not wish to be enemies with us. Wu Keqian suddenly said. His voice contained a certain tinge of confusion as he said in a low voice, although our scouts didn't return, they weren't actually killed either. According to Xiao Cha's skill, the vitality of the 5 White Tiger Guild members specializing in agility hasn't dropped even a bit after they were captured. Eh? Sun Ling looked at him more and more confused. What does it all mean? You ask me, but who am I going to ask? Wu Keqian forced a smile and said with hidden bitterness, the other side doesn't seem to have the intention of fighting. Maybe it's because they are too busy with the construction of the city? But this is also good for us. Uncle Wu, can I ask a question? Wu Keqian looked at Bai Zemin and said easily, Kid, you saved my daughter's life and in the future, you might even be my son-in-law. Ask whatever you have to ask. Wu Yijuan was so nervous that she didn't even have time to bother blushing at her father's words. On the other hand, Meng Qi raised both eyebrows and wondered what kind of expression the man in front of her would put on if he knew that the person he had just referred to as a potential future son-in-law was actually aiming for his seat. Bai Zemin also suppressed the unease he felt and asked in a serious voice, what is your real target? My real target? Wu Keqian muttered with wide eyes. Right. Your real target. Bai Zemin nodded before slowly explaining, Currently, Uncle Wu's faction has over 200,000 survivors, and among them almost 50% are military personnel, regardless if most of them are new recruits without too much experience. On the other hand, the faction established under the name China Renaissance practically rules an entire large district. My question is, Uncle Wu, do you plan to rule over China and become the new founding father? The atmosphere inside the room suddenly became slightly heavy when Bai Zemin asked that question. Wu Yijuan's breathing became stagnant and her hands began to become sweaty after realizing that this question might be a more than crucial point for the future. Meng Qi silently watched Wu Keqian, and in her heart, she hoped that the man's answer would not be directed in a direction antagonistic to her brother Bai Zemin. 4. Everyone's sake. Sun Ling looked at Bai Zemin breathlessly. Even she had not dared to ask Wu Keqian such a question, but the young man in front of her had not only dared to ask such a delicate question, but from the calm expression on his face Sun Lin could tell that there was not even a hint of fear in him. This confused and surprised her tremendously, as Sun Ling was sure that Bai Zemin was fully aware that Wu Keqian was an extremely powerful second-order warrior. Did he think that just because Wu Yijuan was in love with him that his head was safe? Because if this was the reason behind his confidence, then Sun Ling would really look down on him and mock herself for holding such a person in high esteem. Kid, you really are brave to ask such a question without even hesitating. Wu Keqian also looked at Bai Zemin with surprise. Uncle Wu, do you think that a person who came out alive from seas of zombies and crawled out of seas of blood can be afraid of death? Bai Zemin sighed and his eyes flashed with complex light when he said these words. Wu Keqian naturally thought that Bai Zemin was exaggerating. After all, while he knew that the young man in front of him had to fight many enemies and go through hundreds of thousands to cross the Eastern Dragon's back, things like getting out alive from seas of zombies and crawling out of seas of blood were something that even a second-order existence like him could not accomplish, let alone a first-order soul evolver. However, Wu Keqian understood the essence in Bai Zemin's words. Therefore, he nodded and said with satisfaction, a true man is not afraid to fight to the death, let alone in this world. After a pause, Wu Keqian let his back rest on the back of the sofa and said slowly, as for your previous question, I have no plans to rule at all. Eh? Bai Zemin couldn't help but look at him with genuine surprise. In fact, not only him, everyone in the room looked at Wu Keqian in shock. However, Wu Yijuan's eyes immediately sparkled with delight as Meng Qi sighed with relief in her heart. On the other hand, Sun Ling looked at her husband in confusion. The ambitious Wu Keqian had really just said those words of his own free will? She could not believe her ears. However, Wu Keqian's next words cleared all doubts. Chapter 622 Hope. Actually, I know well that my future is not destined to be too bright. Wu Keqian pointed out in a calm voice. When I evolved into the First Order, I chose a job called Flaming Warrior. While I'm not quite sure how good this Flaming Warrior job is, I can at least say with certainty that it's not an ordinary one. However, when I evolved to the Second Order, the job I chose was not the strongest among the options that appeared in my eyes to choose from. Bai Zemin was not surprised to hear those words from Wu Keqian, as Lilith had given him hints about it before. However, the same could not be said for the other people inside the living room. But why? Wu Yijuan looked at her father in surprise. If you chose a special job at the beginning, you clearly should have chosen a special job as your second order job. Special job. Yes, special job. That's a good way to describe it. Wu Keqian muttered before smiling with some regret as he explained, Yijuan, unlike free souls, I am a man with a great weight on my shoulders. I can not only think for my own sake but also need to think for the sake of hundreds of thousands. If I had chosen a special job for my second advancement, I would still be stuck in the First Order and the base would surely be in chaos by now. At the end of the day, it was the power of being a second-order warrior that allowed me and still allows me to keep the waters calm. Here, simply put, you were forced to choose that option despite knowing it was not the best one for you. Bai Zemin concluded with comprehensive eyes. That's right. Wu Keqian nodded and did not hide anything at all. Thanks to this power, I managed to build a secure base in this world. Thanks to this power, I managed to create some order among so much chaos. Thanks to this power, more than 200,000 humans can go to their beds without fear of a zombie devouring them while they sleep. Without this almost overwhelming power, many would rise up in an attempt to seize the false crown I am wearing on my head at this moment, and this would have caused countless to die and many more to suffer as a consequence. Bai Zemin could not help but sigh in his heart, and when he looked at Wu Keqian now he could not help but feel real admiration. Uncle Wu, you really are a good leader. Nah. I'm just doing my best. Wu Keqian shook his head and sneered at himself. There are many things that I have to turn a blind eye to for the greater good. Even though on the surface this base looks very firm, there are always polluted waters underground that are difficult to remove without causing a strong shaking on the surface. Therefore, I have no choice but to let them be even if I know they are there. Then what will you do? Wu Yijun asked as she looked at her father with pity but also with hope. Wu Yijun felt pity that her father had no choice but to sacrifice his own future, but she also felt that thanks to that, there was now more hope to avoid a war between the people she loved the most in this world. The question Wu Yijun asked was the question everyone was wondering, and Wu Keqian's answer was what Bai Zemin was most looking forward to. Naturally, I will hand over my power when the highest leader manages to reach here, or until when we manage to reach him. Wu Keqian said in a resolute voice. The highest leader? Sun Ling was surprised. You mean the president? Right. Wu Keqian nodded and said calmly, Mr. President Xian Yuan will definitely be able to unify the country again with my father's help and wipe out the dangers attacking our race will be a matter of time. Once we can connect with China's Central Command, I will hand over all my power. Well, although I will lose many of my current privileges, I will also gain many others. It's not as if I'm doing this only out of kindness, as I also have a family to care about. The eyes of Bai Zemin flashed weirdly as he heard these words, but he said nothing and instead kept silent, waiting to see how the situation would unfold a little more. But, father. Wu Yijun hesitated for a moment and with somewhat evasive eyes finally couldn't help but point out, what will happen to Bing Shui? Bing Shui? Wu Keqian looked at her in surprise before his eyes flashed with understanding. That child, Bing Shui. Even though she has her reasons for hating her father, for better or worse she carries the blood of the Xian Yuan family in her veins. But even if we put aside the fact that she is the daughter of the president, the power of that girl is more than enough to take a high and firm position within the new government that will lead China into a new era. Wu Yijun's eyes filled with sadness as she heard her father's words. Her family did not know Shangguan Bing Shui well enough to know that she hated her father to the marrow of her bones. Wu Yijun doubted with all her heart that her good sister would ever forgive Xin Yuan Wendian, and it would already be a miracle if she didn't cut off his head with her sword once they met. Uncle Wu, may I ask a question? Bai Zemin raised his hand again and asked to speak out of respect. Wu Keqian looked at Bai Zemin and Meng Qi before slowly saying, It seems like you already knew about Bing Shui's background but your younger sister didn't. Although that's also normal considering that you traveled together with Bing Shui all this time. Go ahead and ask. Meng Qi's eyes were brimming with surprise and her little mouth slightly gaped open after hearing that the person she was so curious about for the past few days was actually the daughter of the nation's president. However, what Meng Qi felt most was disbelief since according to her civilian knowledge, President Xin Yuan Wendian only had one eldest son, there was no record of a daughter, but Meng Qi was smart and quickly understood what was going on. The words unwanted daughter popped into her mind without her really looking for them and she immediately felt pity for Shangguan Bing Shui and disdain for the man she had never seen in person. I was wondering what you would do if a person who proves to be worthy to rule but is not President Xin Yuan appears. Bai Zemin's words had an immediate effect and as if someone had a remote control capable of controlling people, everyone froze looking at him with different expressions on their faces. However, a second later, Wu Keqian burst out laughing. Wu Yijuan's father laughed heartily and looked like he had heard a good joke. It came to a point where even Sun Ling couldn't help but frown with a hint of disgust on her face. Ha ha ha. No, sorry. Wu Keqian said, still in tears and laughter. It seemed really hard for him to hold back the urge to laugh. It's just that it's really funny. Funny? Bai Zemin frowned and asked in confusion, what's funny? Wu Keqian took a deep breath, and it wasn't until several seconds later when, instead of answering Bai Zemin's question, he asked a question. Bai Zemin, let me ask you something instead. Have you ever in your life seen a human take on an adult lion in full power in hand-to-hand combat? I'm talking about before we humans could evolve, long before. Bai Zemin stared at him and blinked for a couple of seconds before shaking his head. In the past, he was just another member of society, the son of a family of normal salaried workers. A normal student, his life was the representation of normality, so it was impossible for him to have seen something as crazy and out of all common sense as what Wu Yijuan's father had just said. I did see something like that. With my own eyes. Wu Keqian said with a serious voice and reverence. It was about 15 years ago when it happened. My father, Mr. President, and I were on our way to one of the deepest forests outside Shanghai when, due to unexpected technical problems, the helicopter had no choice but to land in the middle of nowhere. My father and I lived our whole lives in the city under the protection of armed guards. Try to imagine how nervous we were back then after losing even the capacity to communicate with the outside world due to the loss of signal. Wu Keqian paused as if recalling something impressive before continuing to narrate. However, Mr. President was the complete opposite. Even though he was the highest authority and his status the most prestigious of all, he kept his calm and indifferently took up his double-edged sword to lead the way to the exit with nothing but a compass. But we didn't get very far when a lion that was having a feast with the corpse of an ape came our way. I still remember how my legs weakened at that moment, seeing that huge creature and those bestial eyes watching us attentively. It really is worse than you can imagine. Now, try to imagine a man cutting a giant lion into two pieces with a single slash. Wu Keqian looked at Bai Zemin and said in a deep voice, Mr. President's agility naturally wasn't able to keep up with the lion, but with masterful steps, he dodged each of the beast's attacks. Neither my father nor I saw how it happened. All we saw was a sharp flash of light, and the next instant the lion was on the ground roaring in pain as blood and internal organs poured out of the two halves. This was the first time Sun Ling heard such a story. The same was true for Wu Yijuan. Therefore, both of them are really shocked. However, Meng Qi and Bai Zemin were the most shocked. If the president had finished off the lion after the apocalypse, then there would be no shock at all. But the matter was completely different if this had happened before the evolution of living beings. A human killing a lion with a single slash? Such a thing could only be possible in fantasy movies or books, but never in real life. The president was already powerful before, so it's a fact that his current power will definitely be many times higher than mine. Wu Keqian sighed before slowly saying, aside from his strength, the president has his status, which will allow him to more easily lead the country. Also, while his rule might not be perfect, it is a fact that he ranked as one of the best presidents China has ever had in history. Bai Zemin closed his eyes and shook his head, much to Wu Keqian's confusion. Then, he opened his eyes and with a faint smile said softly, Uncle Wu, you still haven't answered my question from before. What would you do if a person who proves to be worthy to rule but is not President Xin Yuan emerges? Wu Keqian froze and looked at Bai Zemin with increasingly serious eyes. For the first time, he realized that the young man in front of him was definitely more than what he showed on the surface, to the point that even someone like him no longer dared to treat lightly. After thinking deeply for more than a full minute, Wu Yijuan's father finally said, in the hypothetical case, if some person ever appears and demonstrates leadership ability good enough to bring back the peace of our motherland, and if that person holds enough power to head off possible takeovers, Wu Keqian looked Bai Zemin in the eyes and said in a serious voice, "Then I wouldn't mind handing over everything to that person." Chapter 623 Second Order Shangguan Bing Shui and Changes. Just as Bai Zemin and Wu Yijun sighed in relief in their hearts as if they had finally found a way out of the seemingly dead end they had been facing lately, Wu Keqian continued, "Of course, just because I am willing to hand over the leadership position to that person doesn't mean that if tomorrow someone stronger than me comes along, I will simply hand everything over on a silver platter." His voice was calm and matter-of-fact as he said, "At the end of the day, even if there is someone stronger than me somewhere, I doubt that person can really beat me if I use my troops. As I said before, it takes more than strength to lead." Bai Zemin frowned slightly before his eyes suddenly flashed as if he had understood something. He looked at Wu Keqian with a smile and said, "I see. Although it is indeed risky, if I were in Uncle Wu's position I would probably take a similar decision." Ha ha ha. Wu Yijun, Meng Qi, and Sun Ling looked at each other as they heard Bai Zemin's words followed by Wu Keqian's laughter. None of the three women had any idea what these two men were talking about, as at the end of the conversation there seemed to be some sort of coded message there. "Oh, I almost forgot." The father of Wu Yijun suddenly clapped his hands once as if to get everyone's attention, and as he looked at Bai Zemin he said with a smile on his face, "Zemin, do you have something to do tonight?" "Excuse me?" Bai Zemin looked at him in confusion as he thought to himself, "Sorry, Uncle Wu. This daddy is not interested in men." Then, Wu Keqian explained the reason behind his words. "Good thing, isn't it, big brother?" Meng Qi asked with a cute smile as she walked beside her big brother. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about according to Mayor Wu. It's possible to avoid war and could even end both sides without breaking relations at all." Meng Qi pointed before tilting her head prettily and saying in a whispering voice, "Although I didn't quite understand the last part. In fact, you could say that this conversation eased my worries a bit." Bai Zemin nodded. "However, just as Uncle Wu stated, he won't hand over everything just because someone better showed up." Meng Qi, imagine you are an English teacher like our mother, but one day a teacher suddenly appears who is better than you in every aspect and is even willing to work for less money. Will you give up your job just because your students will get a better education? Of course not. Otherwise, I wouldn't be out of a job. Besides, it's not just about teaching or salary, it's also about attitude. Who knows if the new teacher will be able to maintain his or her attitude after a certain period of time has passed, right?" Bai Zemin nodded and said in a serious voice, "Apart from strength and ability, Uncle Wu also needs to understand what kind of person he is to whom he will be handing on a silver platter the lives of hundreds of thousands and even the possibility of ruling over China. Remember that unlike in the past, humans can now live hundreds of years if we evolve enough, so in contrast with before, a ruler can rule over the people for many generations. Therefore, attitude is also very important." I see. Meng Qi nodded but soon frowned and remarked, "However, big brother, wouldn't that take too long?" From the understanding that Meng Qi had, her big brother needed to rule all of China in less than a year, so he surely didn't have the time to show someone else what kind of person he was. Moreover, considering that he was currently only reckoned as the ruler of a single district, it could be said that were it not for the fact that Meng Qi had a fairly good understanding of Bai Zemin's strength, she would doubt with all her heart that in such a short time a person could accomplish such a thing. In fact, it would take too long. Bai Zemin nodded calmly. "But don't worry, Meng Qi." He looked up at the sky and said mysteriously, "I'm sure that soon Uncle Wu will hand over his position willingly. I just have to wait a little longer." Meng Qi nodded even though she did not quite understand what was happening as she trusted the words of the young man walking beside her as if they were her own words. But in fact, the reason why Bai Zemin said that was because he could feel that although the sky was clear, it was actually much more opaque compared to normal days. He was 90% sure that it would not be long before the Earth would fully evolve to its second stage, and Lilith advised him to prepare for the worst when such a thing happened. Unfortunately, when Bai Zemin asked her what she meant, she simply shook her head and told him that due to the soul record rules she could not say too much about the matter or else she would be punished. But there was also no need for her to say too much since Bai Zemin himself could draw his own conclusions just by feeling the mana around him acting slightly peculiar. By the way, Main Chi. What will you wear tonight? Tonight. Oh. You mean the welcome party Mayor Wu prepared for Sister Xietain? Yes. By the way, Main Chi. Since when did you and Wu Xietain become sisters? Don't ask so many questions, big brother. That's why you weren't too popular in the past. Brat, are you looking for me to spank you like when we were little and you misbehaved? Humph. You dare? Watch how I tell the father if he doesn't break your legs. Consider yourself lucky for now. He. As the brother-sister duo casually chatted, they headed on foot towards the western area a few streets away from where the villa of Wu Xietan's family was located. Since it had already been several days after Bai Zemin and the others had arrived at the base, Wu Keqian actually kept his earlier promise and found houses for the whole group. However, Bai Zemin refused his since his parents' house was big anyway and it was not as if he planned to stay in a fixed place considering all that he still had to do. After a few minutes, the two finally arrived at a beautiful two-story house of approximately 200 square meters each floor. The surroundings were covered by high fences of mutant plants so it was impossible to see what people were doing in the courtyard. Bai Zemin could hear from afar the sound of the pool water coming from the bottom of the property, so he judged that the function of those mutant plants was to provide privacy during swimming time. So this is where the president's daughter lives. Main Chi whispered softly. Main Chi, don't touch this topic in front of her. Bai Zemin warned in a low voice. Remember that not all families are close or get along like we do. Okay. Main Chi nodded immediately and didn't ask any more questions despite her curiosity. Bai Zemin really appreciated his little sister's good sense, and after clarifying a few things to her without talking about Shangguan Bingshue's private life since it was not his place to reveal other people's private matters, he rang the doorbell and took a step back as he waited patiently. 20 seconds passed, but no one came. Therefore, Bai Zemin rang the doorbell again as he knew Shangguan Bingshue was at home thanks to Wu Xietain telling him before he left the villa of her family. However, another 20 seconds passed and Shangguan Bingshue had not even poked her head out of the window, forgetting to open the door. Bai Zemin and Main Chi exchanged confused glances before the first rang the doorbell again. 20 more seconds passed and Bai Zemin could not help but frown. He sensed that Shangguan Bingshue was at home but didn't understand why she wasn't opening the door. Then, he began to ring the doorbell like crazy. 1 minute. 2 minutes. *T. Bai Zemin finally couldn't take it anymore and started banging on the door while shouting loudly, Bingshue, I know you're in there. Open the door already. The commotion naturally attracted the attention of the people passing by as Main Chi noticed that some of them began to point and whisper under their breath. This? Big brother, forget it. Let's better come back later. Main Chi was curious about Shangguan Bingshue but didn't want to cause trouble either. Besides, tonight's party would be attended by really important people so Shangguan Bingshue would surely be there too. Bai Zemin finally stopped and after a few seconds thought he nodded, all right. Let's go. Although he did not understand what was going on, Bai Zemin did not feel like knocking on the door of a house for the rest of his life. However, just as he stopped the knocking and was planning to take Main Chi back, the sound of a door opening behind him immediately stopped him. Bingshue, you finally. Bai Zemin's words suddenly got stuck in his throat as he turned around and saw Shangguan Bingshue. You. It was all he could say as his eyes widened wider and wider. Main Chi was also surprised, and even though she was a woman, she could not help but gasp when she saw the woman in front of her. If Wu Xietain was a princess either in terms of physical appearance or aura, then the woman Main Chi had in front of her eyes now was the incarnation of a goddess. Meng Qi felt that in front of Wu Yijun she could barely hold her ground, but when she looked at Shangguan Bingshui now, she realized for the first time what many girls felt when they looked at her in the past. For the first time, she felt suffocated and overwhelmed. Shangguan Bingshui looked at Bai Zemin with a smile very different from all her usual smiles, then, her blue eyes that sparkled playfully stopped for a moment on Meng Qi and watched her curiously for a couple of seconds. However, soon she looked towards the sidewalk and saw that about 7 or 8 people had gathered, probably because of the earlier commotion, but now they were looking at her breathlessly. Then, she said something that Bai Zemin never thought he would hear from her mouth. Look who showed up. If it's not this Bai Zemin, the man who shows up every day with a new woman at his side, forgetting about his old friends. You. Who are you? Bai Zemin looked at her with wide eyes. Shangguan Bingshui chuckled and said as if it was obvious, of course, I am Shangguan Bingshui. What's the matter with that question? No. There are several things wrong here, to begin with. Bai Zemin felt like shouting, but he was so shocked that the words wouldn't come out even though he knew what he wanted to say. The current Shangguan Bingshui, far from that cold and distant vibe she had conveyed in the past, looked a lot more approachable, charming, and even playful. Had something happened during the previous week? Just as such a question popped into the head of Bai Zemin, he seemed to realize something and his expression changed slightly as he whispered softly, You broke through to the second order? Shangguan Bingshui smiled slightly, and although she said nothing, Bai Zemin immediately had his answer as he felt joy and pride brimming from her spirit. Chapter 624 Shangguan Bingshui and Bai Zemin linking souls. The decorations inside the house that the government had gifted Shangguan Bingshui within the privileged residential area were extravagant, to say the least. Not only was the house large enough to comfortably accommodate a family of up to 6, but even the cheapest paint that decorated the walls in the past could have been sold for more than 40,000 yuan, not to mention the furniture and the construction itself. However, both Meng Qi and Bai Zemin stopped being surprised by such things as decorative luxuries a long time ago. Instead, the two of them focused on the woman before them immediately after taking a seat. So, when did you break the barrier between the first order and the second order? Bai Zemin asked in awe as he looked at Shangguan Bingshui in shock. Not only had she become more beautiful than before by a considerable margin, but the aura surrounding her body at this moment was a mix between ice and fire, especially tempting for any man with the power and desire to conquer a challenging woman. What was most remarkable, however, was that Bai Zemin could feel how the soul power of Shangguan Bingshui was pure and strong enough at this point to present a slight threat to his life. Considering how strong Bai Zemin was on this point, it was not difficult for him to judge that Shangguan Bingshui at present should be able to face an initial third-order existence without any problem, and in fact her chances of victory would definitely not be low. Shangguan Bingshui looked at Meng Qi with a hint of coldness and calmly asked, before answering your question, don't you think you need to introduce me and this young lady? Meng Qi already expected to receive this kind of gaze of Shangguan Bingshui from the moment her big brother warned her about what kind of person she was towards strangers, so Meng Qi didn't feel awkward. In fact, she smiled in a friendly manner and introduced herself before Bai Zemin could say anything. How are you? My name is Meng Qi and I am his adopted younger sister. Oh? Shangguan Bingshui raised both eyebrows and the coldness emanating from her receded considerably once she heard Meng's background, even though it didn't completely go away. She looked her up and down attentively as if she was making sure of something before nodding and slowly saying, You really are pretty. Your big brother has told me a lot about you, even praised you as someone outstanding, so I've also been curious to meet you. It's a pleasure to finally have the honor. I can see that you really are an impressive young woman even though this is our first meeting, Meng Qi. Meng Qi smiled slightly and said humbly, even though I don't think I'm outstanding enough to catch the attention of someone like you, I'll accept your compliment. My big brother has talked about you a lot over the past week, so I was curious to Meet you, one of the reasons for our visit. Shangguan Bingshui raised both eyebrows and looked at Bai Zemin somewhat reproachfully as she said a bit doubtfully, your brother has mentioned me a lot. And here I was thinking that he had forgotten his old friendships, disappearing for so long without even caring about the life or death of others. The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth twitched a couple of times, but knowing that Shangguan Bingshui was partially right, he said nothing. At the end of the day, the current world was becoming more dangerous by the day, so even someone as powerful as Shangguan Bingshui could fall in combat if something unexpected happened, not to mention the others. Bai Zemin had become so immersed in his joy of meeting his loved ones that he actually subconsciously forgot to ensure the safety of other people who in their own way were also important to him. Haha. Meng Qi laughed somewhat awkwardly before saying in a low and somewhat perplexed voice, your personality. It's a bit different from what I expected to find after hearing the description of my brother. About you. Bai Zemin had previously told her that Shangguan Bingshui was cold, indifferent, and did not measure her words when talking to other people. However, he had also told her that this was just her strong exterior, a kind of defensive armor that acted as a defense on herself and thus avoided being harmed by others, in a way quite similar to the skill stone heart in Bai Zemin's possession, except that Shangguan Bingshui did not seem to have any of such passive skill. But unlike what Meng Qi expected, the woman in front of her was quite friendly and even joking, which confused her a lot as now she didn't know how to react. Regarding that, Shangguan Bingshui sighed and a glint of hidden bitterness flashed in her beautiful blue eyes, as she said softly, it's not something I can control in this kind of circumstance. Is it because of your evolution? Bai Zemin, who had been sidelined all this time, immediately intervened. In fact, Shangguan Bingshui nodded and slowly explained, when I reached level 50, 3 paths presented themselves in front of me. The first path was called Frost Queen, a special job. The second path was called Ice Reaper, another special job. Finally, the third path was called Ice Soul Charming Demon, and of course, it was this last one the one I chose, as it is clearly a continuation of the path I have been walking since I chose my first job when I stepped into the First Order. Ice Soul Charming Demon? Bai Zemin was surprised and quickly asked, Bingshui, that job of yours increases your charm passively, doesn't it? Yeah, Shangguan Bingshui nodded and calmly explained while tucking a strand of silver hair behind her ear with a really charming movement. My First Order job increased my natural charm by approximately 20%, while my current job, Ice Soul Charming Demon, increases my natural charm by 35% in addition to improving my outward appearance considerably. Bai Zemin looked at her with weird eyes and couldn't help but think on Lilith. At this rate, wouldn't Shangguan Bingshui end up becoming something similar to a succubus in the future? However, he did not dare to make such a comparison with Shangguan Bingshui present, as he knew that she had a strong rivalry with Lilith and she probably would not like being compared to her enemy very much. Hey, Bingshui, can you tell me about the requirements you had to complete to evolve? Bai Zemin asked carefully, as this was a rather private matter. If possible, I would also like you to explain a bit about your new job, qualities and the like. Revealing something as important as one's class to another person was an extremely dangerous thing to do, as the other person could use that knowledge to exploit your weaknesses. However, Bai Zemin could only really count on Shangguan Bingshui in times of real urgency, such as the appearance of a single powerful enemy against whom numbers were but useless numbers. Precisely because of this, he needed to connect with her in a special way on the battlefield. However, Bai Zemin's concerns were unnecessary, as Shangguan Bingshui nodded easily. In fact, she thought the same as him and also did not fear that he would do something wrong to her, since their trust had grown to a very high point after facing so many dangers. Especially what happened in Oblong World during the Azura invasion. The events that occurred there brought Shangguan Bingshui and Bai Zemin very close, mostly in terms of trust, where they were even able to trust each other with their lives. However, Shangguan Bingshui suddenly thought about something, and instead of directly speaking to Bai Zemin, she extended a hand forward. Bai Zemin looked at the hand extended in his direction in clear invitation and was forced to admit in his heart, that were it not because he was used to Lilith, Shangguan Bingshui's current charm might have clouded his thoughts for a moment. That's how beautiful and charming the current her was, every gesture dangerously perfect. What's wrong? He asked in confusion. Let's link records. Shangguan Bingshui said, leaning her body slightly forward so that a few strands of hair fell to the sides of her face. With her right leg on top of her left one, the white-colored dress that previously reached her knees was lifted up to partially expose her soft white thighs. However, the words she spoke did not allow Bai Zemin to enjoy the beautiful view. Do you have a fever? He asked with an exhausted sigh. Did you forget that if something goes wrong your soul can get hurt? Even Chen he had to spend a few days hunting to recover the damage to the quality of his soul power. Shangguan Bingshui did not take her hand away and while staring him straight in the eyes replied in a clear voice, but neither you nor I know if we will not be able to link records through our souls, right? Bai Zemin had no way to reply this time so he remained silent, looking at her hand hesitantly as he did not want to hurt her. At the end of the day, although the current Shangguan Bingshui was closer to him in terms of power, her soul would surely be damaged significantly considering the purity of his soul power. Besides, if my soul gets a little hurt, aren't you there to protect me as I recover? It's not like because of an injury I'm going to be weakened to the point where a first order or perhaps second order existence can kill me. Shangguan Bingshui pointed, pressing him to take her hand as she opened the palm in his direction. Bai Zemin sighed and after some consideration finally gave up. Under Meng Qi's confused and worried eyes, he extended his bare hand forward and a moment later both hands closed in a mutually agreeing grip. Meng Qi did not know what was going on nor did she have any idea that the records could be linked or the possible consequences this could have on the souls of those involved. However, it was not necessary to know too much about the matter or be a genius to realize that it was something dangerous and not to be trifled with judging from the conversation she had just heard. That was precisely why she was worried and anxious since the last thing she wanted was for one of the people most important to her to get hurt. Are you really sure? I don't see the need to do this at all and if you're worried about revealing such private information because of Meng Qi's presence then we can wait until when it's just the two of us to touch on this matter again. Bai Zemin said in an attempt to persuade her. In fact, I can go to the outer courtyard now for you two to chat more quietly. Meng Qi even stood up when she said this as she was really worried about Bai Zemin. Besides, she also understood that what they were talking about here was extremely important and private so an outsider like her who did not know Shangguan Bingshui at all should not listen. However, Shangguan Bingshui was a woman of strong and independent personality so once she made her decision it was practically impossible to change her mind. I'm sure, she said with certainty before smiling slightly and saying softly, this has nothing to do with your younger sister's presence at all. I'm doing this out of my own curiosity and also to get a doubt out of my mind that's been bothering me lately. Bai Zemin opened his mouth to say something but was forced to close it when he felt Shangguan Bingshui's intention trying to link a part of her soul with his. It had been a while, but the two would finally see if they could link records or not. At this point, even Bai Zemin wondered if his soul could be linked to Shangguan Bingshui's soul and if that was the case he also wondered if it would be as smooth as when he linked with Lilith. Chapter 625 Face to Face with the Past After Many Years, I Love You vs. I Loved You, Part 1. Bai Zemin immediately focused his mind not daring to act careless at all when he felt part of the soul that contained a part of the records that made up the existence known as Shangguan Bingshui trying to link up with a part of his soul. The subject of souls was something that Bai Zemin did not dare to treat casually but knew that sooner or later he would have to face. It was just that he preferred to leave that matter for later, as was visible by the fact that he had not even asked Lilith any more questions on this matter. At the end of the day, he was still too weak to think about something as distant and untouchable as souls. When part of Shangguan Bingshui's soul linked to part of his own, Bai Zemin's expression immediately changed as he felt rejection from both sides. He had experienced something similar with Wu Yijuan before, so he was preparing to receive the expected backlash of pain. Shangguan Bingshui also noticed this not-so-small fact, and just as happened with Bai Zemin, her expression also sank. However, contrary to him, she did not give up and gritted her teeth at the same time as she forced her soul to connect with his, sending out more soul power to strengthen that part of her soul. Even when she had experienced a tremendous amount of pain back then when she tried to link her soul with Chen He's, Shangguan Bingshui was really not willing to give up this time. Bai Zemin's soul was simply too strong and strange. So much so that in that unsteady spiritual bond that had formed, Shangguan Bingshui felt small and insignificant, just like a wooden boat in the middle of the rough sea being battered by fierce waves on a stormy night. But what happened next surprised Bai Zemin. Just as he was preparing to receive a backlash strong enough to avoid hurting Shangguan Bingshui's soul, restraining his own soul, that unstable bridge linking the two sides suddenly stopped trembling with such dread. Shangguan Bingshui frowned slightly and a faint whimper escaped from her tightly closed lips. However, a second later and at the same time as a bead of sweat slid down her face, a bright smile naturally began to take shape at the corner of her lips. You see, there was nothing to worry about after all, she said softly, clearly exhausted as if she had just finished experiencing a great battle to the death. Bai Zemin wanted to say a lot of things at this moment. He wanted to ask her if she was okay. He also wanted to ask her why she had done something as imprudent as compromising more records which could have hurt her more critically, and many other things besides. However, there were no words coming out of his mouth at this moment, as out of pure instinct his mind focused practically entirely on the records flashing across his retina. Freeze the hearts of 300.000 enemies, 300.000/300.000. Charm 100 first order enemies using charming eyes, 100/100. Using Ice Maker in conjunction with charming eyes. Take the life of 50 second order enemies without receiving ally support, 50/50. Upgrade the skill Charming Eyes to the third order, completed. Upgrade the skill Ice Maker to the peak of the second order, completed. Experience your soul quivering with emotion, completed. You have successfully evolved and become a second order existence. You receive the unique class Ice Soul Charming Demon. It becomes more difficult for you to fall under passive, active, or unique skills with the ability to affect your reasoning, feelings, or combat ability. Your natural charm increases by 35% and your beauty transcends to a new stage, officially setting you on the path of a charming demon. You receive the unique third order skill level 5 Spirit of Ice. You have leveled up and reached level 80. You have gained 120 status points to distribute freely. All soul power absorbed during the evolution process has been calculated correctly. You gain additional stats: Strength 520, Agility 513, Stamina 403, Health 590, Mana 492, Magic 499. While Shangguan Bingshui was ecstatic about being able to connect a part of her soul to Bai Zemin's soul, even though the price to pay was to be so exhausted that she could use 2 or 3 hours of replenishing sleep, Bai Zemin himself was experiencing the shock of his life as he looked at the records recorded in that part of Shangguan Bingshui's soul that she linked with him. To begin with, the requirements that the breakthrough mission imposed on Shangguan Bingshui, while not as crazy as the requirements that Bai Zemin had to complete, were undoubtedly far-fetched, to say the least. Leaving aside the first two requirements, which were relatively easier despite their natural difficulty, just the requirement where she was required to kill 50 second-order existences solo and with sub-requirements was enough to make any other existence go crazy and despair. One had to remember and keep in mind that Shangguan Bingshui was still a first-order existence when she had to fulfill those requirements. The requirement where she had to kill those 50 second-order existences was countless times crazier than the requirement Bai Zemin had to go through when he was required to kill 2 first-order enemies while he was still an unclassified existence. In fact, the difficulty of killing 50 second-order enemies single-handedly with sub-requirements was probably equivalent to the difficulty of the requirement in which Xietain had to kill a first-order existence with a single attack while he was an unclassified existence. On the other hand, asking a first-order existence to evolve a skill to third-order. It was a bit too much. If not for the fact that Shangguan Bingshui was powerful and had the full support of both Xietain and the Transcendent faction's resources, where was she going to obtain the soul stones that such a thing required? Another impediment whose magnitude was only slightly below the previous one. Finally, Xietain had no idea what the final requirement meant, and he was sure that Shangguan Bingshui probably did not know what it was and simply fulfilled it by pure chance of fate. Despite all this, it was clear that making your way to walk a unique path that had only been created for you and by you would definitely not have the same ease as making your way to walk a path that was walked by countless existences and that practically everyone could choose. Besides, the rewards for walking that path, they were simply preposterous if not downright insane. Xietain was literally breathless when he saw the insanely high number of natural stats that Shangguan Bingshui had received. It was over 3,000 raw points, for heaven's sake. Xietain didn't know how high Shangguan Bingshui's stats were before, but now he was sure that at least when it came to pure stats and not combat power, he wasn't necessarily above her in certain aspects. Of course, when it came to actual combat power with the destructive skills of Xietain, Shangguan Bingshui would have a lot of trouble fighting against him, but this did not overshadow the fact that the current her undoubtedly had plenty of the ability to give him a lot of trouble. However, after a moment's thought, Xietain understood everything. No matter how one put it, Shangguan Bingshui had killed dozens and dozens of second-order existences while she was still a first-order existence. One of them was even on the verge of level 100. Therefore, it was by no means surprising that she received so many stats. This made Xietain excited to think about how crazy his power boost would be after he completed his evolution requirements and successfully acquired the Mystic Blood class. Xietain looked at her with joy and relief coming from the bottom of his heart as he said softly, "Congratulations, Bingshui, for evolving to the second order. Now your power must be close to mine." Shangguan Bingshui forced a smile and shook her head as she slowly said, "In terms of statistics, yes maybe? But if it comes to full combat power, both you and I know that's not true. My current self can take on a third-order existence in the early levels, but I definitely wouldn't be able to take on a person capable of causing explosions like those in Oblong World, let alone threatening the safety of fourth-order existences." Xietain said nothing regarding this as he was clear about the truth. At the end of the day, statistics did not represent the full strength of a person in the same way that levels did not represent the power limit of an existence. The power of the skills, the synergy of each skill, the purity of the soul power, the treasures, the equipment, etc. There were many variables to take into account. On the other hand, Shangguan Bingshui was happy about another matter. "Hey, Xietain. I'm the first person to succeed in linking part of her soul with you other than you know who?" In fact, Xietain chuckled at the words of Shangguan Bingshui and nodded, "Other than her? You're the only one who managed to create a link with me." However, he suddenly frowned and said somewhat worriedly, "But are you okay?" Just a little bit exhausted, that's all." She smiled refreshingly and waved her hand as if it was nothing, not even a bit of pain. Her Meng Qi's cute ears twitched like those of a charming little animal and she couldn't help but look at Xietain with suspicious eyes as if she was asking him for explanations. "I'll introduce her to you later, Meng Qi," Xietain announced in a firm voice, perhaps too firm for the content of his words. For some reason, Meng Qi felt that the resolve behind the words of her big brother had a much deeper meaning than just introducing her to this her they were talking about. However, Meng Qi didn't know why she felt that way, but she did know that even if she inquired further she would probably get nothing considering how stubborn Xietain was. "By the way, Bingshui. Yes? This change in your personality has to do with the skill spirit of ice?" "That's right. Shangguan Bingshui sighed and said with a bit of a headache, one of the passive functions of this skill is that when I find myself having a conversation with a person I fully trust, my real personality comes out and it's really hard to put up a high front like before. Does that mean you trust me fully? He asked with a playful smile. Bai Zemin was secretly surprised because although he knew that Shangguan Bingshui was not cold at all deep inside and only acted like that with strangers, he did not expect her to be so teasing and even mischievous deep down in her soul. Shangguan Bingshui rolled her eyes and did not respond. If she didn't trust him fully after all they had been through together and all the reasons he had given her, without her asking for them to make her feel secure even in her weakest state, then Shangguan Bingshui wouldn't be able to trust in anyone. Instead, she asked curiously, do you know what a unique skill is? Her eyes moved as if she was reading something invisible to others, and she said weakly, among all my skills and other people's skills, this is the first time I have seen or heard of unique skills. Bai Zemin nodded and calmly explained the same thing Lilith had explained to him previously. So, a unique skill is a unique skill? Shangguan Bingshui asked dumbfounded and with weird eyes after hearing the whole thing. Well, that's the case. Bai Zemin nodded, feeling speechless again as Shangguan Bingshui's reaction and remarks were practically identical to what had happened to him at that moment when he learned the significance of these skills. Before I forget, there is something that really caught my attention earlier, Bai Zemin said suddenly, and for some reason, Shangguan Bingshui felt a bad premonition. Unfortunately, there was nowhere for her to escape to when he immediately asked, what about that last weird requirement? Experiencing your soul trembling with emotion or something? What is that supposed to mean and how did you complete it? Shangguan Bingshui blushed slightly and her beauty immediately shot to never-before-seen heights as her eyes avoided Bai Zemin's intense gaze. He was dumbfounded to see her acting like a shy young maiden in love. Although he was sure that she was indeed a young maiden, the shy and in love parts were the problem at hand. But Shangguan Bingshui had no way of telling Bai Zemin how she completed that requirement, which at one point she thought would be the most difficult to complete. Therefore, after practically begging him with her eyes not to make things difficult for her, she finally managed to breathe a sigh of relief despite Meng Qi's slightly narrowed gaze that shifted between the two of them as if she wanted to clear herself of some doubt. The three of them continued to chat, mainly with Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui catching up as there were many things they needed to inform each other about after not seeing each other for a full week. Meng Qi intervened a few times and even managed to surprise Shangguan Bingshui by coming up with ideas that were somewhat crazy but undoubtedly worth trying not only in the governmental aspect, but Meng Qi was surprisingly good at everything that had to do with science, technology, development, etc. About 2 or 3 hours later, Shangguan Bingshui looked at Bai Zemin and suddenly said, by the way, are you also going to the party tonight? Of course. He nodded and asked, despite knowing the answer, what about you? There's no way I won't go, considering this is for Yizhuan. Shangguan Bingshui pointed out the obvious before continuing. I heard that there will be all the big shots going this time to finally meet Princess Wu. There might even be some with intentions of getting engaged to her. But all kidding aside, this will be a good opportunity to meet the most influential figures in the base. Chapter 626, Face to Face with the Past After Many Years, I Love You vs. I Loved You, Part 2. After chatting for a while more, Bai Zemin left Shangguan Bingshui's house alone. Meng Qi seemed to want to chat a bit more with Shangguan Bingshui, so instead of leaving together with Bai Zemin, she asked the mistress of the house if she didn't mind if she stayed another while, to which Shangguan Bingshui shook her head as she also wanted to at least try to get along with Bai Zemin's family, and so far the sweet but smart Meng Qi had liked her. After leaving Shangguan Bingshui's house, Bai Zemin's destination was Zhongda's house. There he met the young man who spoke only as much as necessary and rarely smiled, acting like a little servant, taking care of his mother. The sight of Zhongda anxious to please brought a rare smile to the face of Bai Zemin, and after wishing them both good luck he left so as not to disturb the reunion of the mother-son duo. Before leaving, however, Zhongda's mother, whose name was Xian, tearfully thanked Bai Zemin for all he had done for her son all this time, and because she knew that if it were not for him this reunion would probably never have been possible. Bai Zemin simply shook his head and told Xian that there was nothing to thank him for. At the end of the day, Zhongda was no longer a mere subordinate and could be considered a rather close friend of his. Having fought together practically since the beginning of the apocalypse, regardless of the difference in power, it was inevitable that some camaraderie would form between the two of them. So helping Zhongda to be happy naturally was something Bai Zemin would do if it was possible. Although Xian was a bit malnourished since before reuniting with her son she was barely able to maintain her existence by working in a workshop where they were in charge of making clothes using mutant beast hides, her problem was nothing that a bit of mutant meat soup couldn't solve. In a couple of days, she would not only regain her former condition but would surely begin to improve and become stronger than her past self. After leaving Zhongda's residence, Bai Zemin also made sure to visit Kai Jingyi and Nanbong Lingxin. Both girls lived together and like Shangguan Bingshui and Zhongda they did not accept maids in their house. Having strangers continuously hanging around them would be bad, considering they were spies trying to get as much information as possible about the base. Finally, Bai Zemin tried to visit Chen He, but the talented archer was not at home. Although Bai Zemin could not be sure if his guess was correct or not, knowing Chen he was probably hunting monsters or trying to break through the Second Order now that Shangguan Bingshui had advanced and become countless times more powerful than before. After making sure that everyone was fine and did not experience any major difficulties, Bai Zemin used his status to leave the base without too much hassle. If he were a normal survivor it might be a bit problematic as he would surely have to explain where he was going and the reason behind his exit. After all, a normal survivor would definitely not survive for long outside the base walls, so it would undoubtedly be suspicious that a weak person would want to abandon the only defense that kept his life safe. Not to mention the fact that if a survivor were to get scratched or bitten by a zombie and then return to the base, just by accident passing the entry check, the chaos that would definitely arise was not something the higher-ups or anyone else wanted to see. After making sure that there was no one following him, even asserting himself with military-grade goggles with human heat-detecting features that Bai Zemin had casually borrowed from his father, his speed burst fully northward. Bai Zemin even activated the effect of his boots and also used lightning movement, boosting his current speed to over 1,300 kilometers per hour. In addition, he also made use of his strong legs, which pushed that speed to even higher levels. It's amazing that even at this speed I can't break the sound barrier, he said with bated breath. It was really hard to maintain this kind of speed for too long. Even with his current stamina, but without using overlap regeneration, he could only sustain it for 5 or 6 hours at most, not to mention the muscle exhaustion his legs were facing. The sound barrier is one of the strongest barriers a world has. Even more now that this world is evolving. Lilith appeared beside him and pointed calmly. Lilith, where have you been? He asked immediately upon seeing her. She had been very silent the last few days, worrying him. Lilith didn't respond immediately, but Bai Zemin noticed that she was hesitating about something. Lilith, Bai Zemin stopped dead in his tracks, raising a huge cloud of dust which he casually slapped away. He walked over to her and looked into her eyes as he said in a soft voice, I know there's not much I can do for you. At the end of the day, no matter how strong I look to be, I'm nothing more than a first-order existence. However, I hope that you can rely on me more. I can at least offer some advice or just serve as a shoulder of support for you. I don't know. Lilith was still hesitant, but as she felt the warmth transmitted to her cheek when he caressed her face, the worries in her heart began to subside. This made her not know whether to feel happy because she was experiencing strong emotions again or sad because her mood was strongly linked to the young man in front of her. It's nothing serious. In fact, it might seem silly to you. Lilith blushed as she said in a low voice, still enjoying the warmth his hand provided. Tell me, I promise not to laugh. Really? She looked at him with suspicious eyes, to which Baizemin responded with a strong nod. Lilith blushed and dared not look at him, just like a young maiden in love about to profess her love. Then, she said in a whispering voice, "Actually, I'm feeling a little jealous." Jealous? Baizemin blinked in surprise and subconsciously the caressing movement stopped before he restarted it. Then he said with a frown, "Have I given you a reason to be jealous? If so, then I apologize, I really didn't mean to." "No. It's not that." Lilith suddenly stepped forward and walked into his embrace, surprising him. She put his hands around her waist before wrapping her arms around his back and saying in embarrassment, "That little bit? That woman with the surname Shangguan is becoming very strong. Now she may even be the greatest helper on your development path. I, on the other hand, can do nothing but watch." Lilith had been feeling a bit sad the past few days because she was so strong that she was literally on completely different scales from Baizemin. However, in contrast to Lilith, Shangguan Bing Shui could and did walk at the same pace with him. Lilith was already in heaven, so it was difficult for her to interact with mortals. Shangguan Bing Shui could walk alongside Baizemin and walk the path of ascension together from start to finish. While Baizemin was not Lilith's first love, this was undoubtedly her first romantic experience. Regardless of her age, Lilith could not help but feel apprehensive when faced with the inevitable fact that the huge power difference between her and Baizemin would keep them apart. Baizemin was truly at a loss for words. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he kissed the top of her head and remarked in a soft but clear voice, "Lilith, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be where I am today. It is thanks to you that I was able to meet with my family, it is thanks to you that I am who I am right now. It is true that because you are a higher existence and I am a lower existence, we cannot intervene in each other's world physically, but that does not mean that you are not doing anything. Your presence alone is enough, not to mention all the information and guidance you have been giving me all this time." I was thinking. Lilith hesitated for a moment after hearing Baizemin's words before gritting her teeth and saying, "I was thinking if maybe I should become a lower existence in order to." "You can't." Lilith didn't have time to finish her words when Baizemin suddenly put both hands on her slender shoulders and shook her, pushing her off his body but keeping her within his reach. She froze and looked at him with wide eyes because this was the first time Baizemin had yelled at her like that, and even pushed her away with such rudeness. "You can't," he shouted again in a serious voice and said while looking into her eyes, "If you do that, then you better never appear in my life ever again. I, Baizemin, am a man of my word, and if I said I would help you, then that is what I will do." Lilith had been thinking that since she was a higher existence, but less than 100 years old, even if she was punished by the soul record and fell to a lower existence of the fourth order, time would practically not affect her at all, since unlike the rest of the higher existences she was really young, so she was far from dying. However, Baizemin's words reminded her of something that amidst jealousy and insecurity she had forgotten. Baizemin was desperately fighting to become stronger not only for his own sake but also in order to help Lilith achieve her goals and finally find some inner peace. If she lost a great deal of her power because of him, Baizemin would blame himself throughout his life and would probably never be able to forgive himself for it. "I understand." Lilith lowered her head and said in a fading voice, "I'm sorry, I was being selfish." Baizemin took a deep breath and hearing the woman's guilty voice before him, the anger he felt a moment ago began to subside quickly. He drew Lilith back into his hug and said in a gentler voice, "Lilith, even though I don't know why my stone heart skill hasn't evolved yet, I'm sure I really love you." Lilith's body shuddered when she heard his words and subconsciously clung to him tightly. Even though she already knew it, this was the first time Baizemin said it out loud. Many times, even when we already knew something, hearing the right words would bring strong emotions that we could not control, and Lilith's heart precisely began to beat strongly when she heard him openly state his feelings. Baizemin ignored his own nerves and tried to speak in a firm voice. However, he was so nervous that his palms began to sweat as if he was facing an invincible enemy. At the end of the day, this was the second time in his life that Xietain confessed his feelings for a woman. Considering that his first experience was far from pleasant and ended with him returning home heartbroken and, with his personality changing tremendously as a side effect, it was normal for him to be nervous and fearful even though he believed to know the feelings Lilith had for him. With his heart heavy with anxiety, he bravely said, "I plan to take control over the Chinese Renaissance in a week at the most, and after that, I will focus 100% on ruling the rest of China. But before that, I want you to meet my parents and my sister." "Your parents?" Lilith tried to raise her head to look at him, but Xietain refused to let her see his slightly red face, so she couldn't do anything about it, and while she could have used a bit of strength subconsciously, she also didn't wish to abandon the warmth his embrace transmitted to her soul. "Since you are the woman I love, it is only natural that my family meets you," he said, now feeling calmer. "We will spend eternity together. Right?" Lilith seemed to lose all her strength, and with a face as red as an apple she buried herself in his chest as she nodded weakly. Xietain inadvertently let out a huge sigh of relief that washed away all the dark emotions that filled his system. The natural answer of Lilith, as well as her shyness, relieved Xietain tremendously, and the trepidation he felt finally disappeared almost without a trace except for the fear of waking up and realizing that it was all a dream of his. When the fear vanished, Xietain felt himself on the 9th cloud. The happiness was so great that he wanted to look up to the sky and howl like a wolf to release some of the joy he was feeling for fear that his body might explode because of happiness. How could he not be happy when the woman he loved had just openly reciprocated his feelings? Even if Lilith hadn't said the magic words, the fact that she affirmed that she would spend all eternity by his side exposed her heart completely. Thousands of thoughts and memories flashed before Xietain's eyes as if a movie was playing in his brain. He never expected that the strange woman he met at that fateful moment when his life changed dramatically would actually end up becoming the woman he would be willing to die for. But little did Xietain know that in a matter of hours, he would be facing that distant past that many years ago had caused him a lot of pain and suffering. Chapter 627, Face to Face with the Past After Many Years, I Love You vs. I Loved You, Part 3. Xietain's and Lilith's hearts were beating strongly. Now that they had both made their feelings for each other clear in one way or another, shyness and joy naturally took over. Neither was the other's first love, but if it could be said without prejudice that Lilith was the first woman Xietain could call girlfriend, and at the same time Xietain was the first man Lilith could call boyfriend. Being first-timers in this kind of relationship, the two were almost like blank canvases even though they were both properly grown adults. Without impurities, just like a newborn who had not yet been stained by the wickedness of the world, the love they both felt was rosy and bright as a rainbow. As to whether that love remained like that or not, it would depend on whether the two people involved were able to maintain the characteristics that gave that beautiful color and brightness. After several minutes of silence during which the two simply hugged each other, Xietain finally broke the pleasant silence that had formed. "Lilith, I want you to know that to me you are the only woman. I haven't fallen in love in a long time, and were it not for the fact that you and I went through so much together, as well as the fact that we know we are bound by a long destiny, it is unlikely that this love could have taken root in me." Xietain paused slightly after these words, before calmly continuing. "I admit that Bing Shui is a breathtaking woman in every way you look at her. Appearance, body, aura, knowledge, charm. We could say that if we leave you completely out of the equation, the woman known as Shangguan Bing Shui is undoubtedly the most perfect woman I have ever met in my life." Lilith said nothing, and her face did not change at all even though Xietain was showered with praise for another woman. Lilith was a mature woman, not a child. She knew perfectly well that Shangguan Bing Shui was an incredible woman, to say the least, and there was nothing wrong in admitting it. Seeing that she did not react badly to his words, Xietain smiled in satisfaction at his taste for mature women and continued slowly. but regardless of how perfect she may be, regardless of whether she is my best helper, Bing Shui is a good and dear friend whom I cherish very much. Nothing more and nothing less than a good and dear friend. She, just as I was until recently, is completely focused on evolving as fast as possible without wandering off her path and trying to find her mother, so I doubt she has time to think about things like romance, or else she would have fixed things with Chen He by now. Lilith said nothing for a good couple of seconds before raising her face to look at Bai Zemin. She narrowed her eyes mischievously and her lips pursed into a somewhat disdainful smile as she calmly said, "You little pervert, don't you realize that she's interested in you?" Bai Zemin raised an eyebrow and naturally did not believe Lilith's words at all. Instead, he let his hands that were around Lilith's slender waist slowly lower until his palms rested comfortably on her high and tempting butt. "What are you doing?" "No, well, since you called me a little pervert, I thought it best to live up to the title." Bai Zemin gently slapped her right cheek and felt it quiver smoothly before saying with apparent calmness, "Now, let's get moving and stop talking nonsense." Lilith watched as his back disappeared into the distance before her body swayed elegantly and appeared beside him. She didn't continue with the Shangguan Bing Shui matter as it was pointless in the first place. Instead, she looked at Bai Zemin with weird eyes. A couple of minutes passed and feeling that she was still looking at him, Bai Zemin finally couldn't help but look at her and asked in confusion, "Do I have something on my face?" Don't you feel lust for me?" Lilith asked somewhat hesitantly. Bai Zemin stumbled over his own feet and almost fell to the ground upon hearing this question. Fortunately, he recovered immediately and seeing that Lilith looked serious about it, he answered honestly, "Of course I do, are you dummy? Your body and spirit tempt my whole existence. It's very hard for me to restrain myself right now. In fact, just before when I spanked you, the reason I immediately pulled away is because my reasoning was getting away." "Weird," Lilith muttered to herself before looking back at him and saying in confusion, "Except for the first few days, my charm in my normal form is suppressed in such a way that a second-order existence would have no trouble bearing. But when you and I do minor naughty things such as earlier or in that moment in bed, my charm to the opposite gender immediately grows exponentially, so nothing below third order should be able to maintain sanity." "Well, even if you ask me, I don't know anything about that." Bai Zemin frowned and shook his head softly. Lilith also shook her head and did not pursue the matter further. Bai Zemin was popular among women, it was an undeniable fact. However, Lilith was worshipped as the heart goddess of countless men. Lilith had seen with her own eyes how a pair of brothers and a pair of father and son slaughtered each other, just because she smiled weakly. It was no exaggeration to say that a mere smile from her was enough to cause the collapse of a kingdom. However, Bai Zemin being a first-order existence was enduring a level of charm that a third-order existence could barely withstand. He didn't know it, but Lilith was clear that untraceable statistics such as charm and critical had nothing to do with the difference in the quality of soul power or the level of an existence. In other words, if a level 1 existence hypothetically reached 100% critical, every one of its attacks would be a critical hit even against a higher existence, but of course the damage would be practically zero due to the abysmal difference in stats, skills, treasures, equipment, magic runes, etc. The same applied to charm. Charm was something that couldn't be avoided just because. Forget it. Lilith decided not to think about the matter anymore as she remembered that everything involving Bai Zemin was a mystery. Not long after, Bai Zemin finally arrived at his destination, and as he saw the high walls slowly beginning to appear in the distance, a glint of pride shone in his eyes. Standing beside him, Evangeline asked with her usual indifference, "What do you think?" "Not bad." "Not bad at all." Bai Zemin nodded in satisfaction. "Things are progressing smoothly, and at this rate, the walls will be completely built in a matter of a day or two at most. How about the internal construction and the fossa?" "The internal construction is going well. Although it would have been easier with the help of Shangguan Bing Shui and her ice skill or Wu Yijuan and her water skill, the fossa construction is also progressing smoothly. Evangeline calmly revealed. I dare say that unless no unforeseen events happen, the construction of the city should reach 70 to 80% within a week and 100% within about 10 days. The biggest problem is the fossa, as we have to bring water from the sea. Xietain planned to surround the whole city with a huge fossa, and inside the fossa, he would put sea mutant beasts with no jumping ability but strong enough to tear apart anything that fell in there. The survivors would have to go over the lift bridges to get in and out, while the attackers would be in for major headaches once the lift bridges were raised. It was undoubtedly an extremely effective defensive means of repelling hordes of enemies. The zombies would be powerless even if they arrived in millions unless a second-order existence personally took a step forward. Don't worry about it, I'll ask Xietain Mayor to control the sea beasts to make it easier. Xietain said confidently as he stroked the little pink dolphin who very comfortably leaned back in his arms, and looked at him with bright eyes after not seeing him for several days. Xiao xiao, sweetheart. Hang in there for a few more days, okay? Then I can bring you with me, he said softly, to which the little dolphin responded with a small nod and excited sparks danced in her big pink eyes. It was impossible for Xietain to take Xiao Xiao with him to the base, therefore, the little pink dolphin had been being cared for by Xiang Feng and the Wen twins. The little creature didn't seem to reject children as much as she did with adults. According to Lilith, this was because children still had relatively purer and healthier minds compared to the sinister minds that adults hid with smiling masks. I guess you already heard what happened? Evangeline said suddenly. Yeah, Xietain nodded clearly with knowledge of what Evangeline was emphasizing despite the fact that she didn't clarify. What about the soul evolvers the China Renaissance sent out to scout? All of them alive. They're currently locked up and tied up with tendons from a first-order mutant bear so they can forget about breaking out. She calmly revealed. Xietain nodded in satisfaction at Evangeline's execution before calmly saying, it is likely that at least for the next few days Wu Keqian will not send troops to disturb us as a large operation is being planned to take place within 2 days. However, be careful and do not let your guard down. Reinforce the defenses, especially at night. Sure. I will take control of the other side in less than a week unless something big and unexpected happens. Xietain announced with complete confidence. Be careful until then. Wu Keqian is a second-order soul evolver and apparently, there is an additional second-order warrior so they can't be underestimated. Don't worry. Evangeline revealed a rare but very beautiful smile as she slowly said, if it was before, a second-order existence could kill me in a matter of minutes. But with the subclass you granted me before you left, I'm confident that even a second-order existence will have to watch its neck if it doesn't want to lose its head. Xietain also smiled slightly upon hearing this and nodded. He closed one eye and looked sideways at her as he said in a soft but firm voice, don't kill them. I'll do my best. Evangeline said with amusement before walking away and saying without looking back, you should go too, or you might arouse suspicion if you disappear for too long. Xietain chuckled and shook his head. He stayed a couple of minutes longer and visited with his closest subordinates, as well as Xiang Feng, Luo Ning, and the Wen sisters, before finally leaving under the teary eyes of the little pink dolphin. Approximately 2 to 3 hours later, Xietain re-entered the Chinese Renaissance realm, so he slowed his advance speed considerably, and not long after that, the great walls built with giant trees filled with mana appeared in his line of sight. Time to get ready for that party. Xietain said as he passed through the gate after identifying himself to the soldiers standing guard. Xietain really wasn't a fan of parties, and even less so when it came to late-night parties intended for members of high society. While he had never been to such high-end parties, he had seen movies and read many novels that served as partial experience. You really base everything that happens in this world depending on the novels you read, don't you? Stop reading my mind, Lilopedia. Chapter 628 Face to Face with the Past After Many Years, I Love You vs. I Loved You, Part 4. Soon the sun fell and the moon rose high in the clear sky welcoming the night. because electricity was no longer a luxury that mankind could rely on. A curfew had been put in place whereby after 20-hour survivors were strictly forbidden to leave their homes unless it was for a serious and verifiable emergency. After all, while several mutant-seated streetlights had been erected on the main streets of the settlement, there were many uncovered areas due to the colossal size of the entire base. Without light, the criminals could carry out their activities with greater ease and tranquility. So to avoid major problems, a curfew was the only plausible solution until a proper and real solution could be found in this matter. However, while 90% of the base was almost completely silent, with the only sound being that of patrols using bicycles in an attempt to save valuable fuel or on foot, that small remaining 10% of the establishment was glowing brightly. Separated from the rest like gods in the sky away from the mortal world, the residents of the privileged area not only enjoyed privileges during the day but also at night. Most of the young people went to nightclubs to enjoy the nightlife, and some went for walks under the moonlight. Street lights that were automatically recharged during the day and turned on during the night illuminated the sidewalks such that even the most fearful would dare to go out at midnight. Tonight, however, the most powerful kept a firm grip on the belts around their children and, ignoring any sign of protest, dragged them with them straight to the Wu family villa. When the spoiled young masters learned that the daughter of the highest leader of the entire establishment had appeared and a welcome party would be held for her, all grumbling disappeared without a trace, and they eagerly began to fix their costumes and meticulously brush their hair. Time passed, and in an instant it was past 2100 hours at night. At the banquet site, countless crystal chandeliers illuminated the huge hall. As dignified-looking men and women proceeded to mingle with red wine in their hands while discussing the news in town, several soft waiters and beautiful waitresses walked around serving the people. On the sides of the banquet hall located in the backyard of the villa were 2 long tables of food from all sorts of places, and not just natives, seafood dishes, mutated vegetables, and even mutant beast meat, all laid out in plain sight and for anyone to taste by simply approaching one of the tables. It gave the distinct impression that there was no apocalypse to worry about in the outside world, as if it had all been a bad dream or a passing evil that had already come to an end. The decorations were truly extravagant, so much so that even a single curtain in the place would easily amount to 2 months' salary of a normal employee before the soul record came to earth. While the adults mingled among themselves, trying to create connections and friendships that would serve to boost their positions a bit or firm up their current seats, the beautiful young women dressed in lovely evening dresses chatted and giggled softly, while the younger men, neatly dressed in expensive suits, stole glances secretly or not, trying to get a glimpse of which target they would be aiming at tonight. Just then, a group of 4 people walked into the hall. 2 of them were men and the other 2 women. 2 young men, the second one clearly older, although one of them looked much younger in comparison. At first, no one paid too much attention, however, when the eager young men noticed that all the young ladies suddenly froze and stared toward the entrance, they also turned to see what was going on. Many of them froze immediately. Like a chain reaction, the adults who were secretly controlling their children to keep them from raising problems in a place where they could not afford to raise them also looked toward the entrance and immediately realized what was going on. The youngest woman was clearly not yet in her 20s, but her beauty was undoubtedly number 1 when compared to any other young woman in the room, and only a handful of adult women could match her, barely using their mature charm. She was wearing a one-piece, calf-length, French blue dress that clung tenderly to her sweet body and ended with light ruffles at the bottom. She was wearing high-heel shoes, approximately 5 centimeters high, exposing her beautiful pearl-like fingers and toes. Her hair, as black as night, was pulled back in an elegant bun with a few strands that were clearly purposely disheveled to add charm and beauty to her overwhelmingly over-the-top face compared to any woman present. However, as surprising as it might seem, the beautiful young woman was not the one who really stole the spotlight this time, as would happen in 99% of situations. It was the younger man, dressed in a black suit with a white shirt underneath and black leather shoes on his feet. Bai Zemin stepped forward confidently as he followed his family into the hall. Standing 6 feet tall, Bai Zemin could only be considered normal in European or American countries. However, in Asia, he was definitely well above average for normal men. Moreover, his body that seemed to have been perfectly sculpted by divine hands did not go unnoticed even with clothes covering it, while his practically transcendental face, enhanced by the purity of the records that made up his soul, was too attractive to be ignored. Bai Zemin's actual charm had long ago surpassed even that of famous supermodels or actors who captured the hearts of countless women. Therefore, it was no surprise that he now attracted attention in such a way, but since he was already used to it and didn't mind it either, he ignored all the female stares and walked forward with unhurried and unworried steps. "Big brother, it looks like touching up your hair a bit was right after all," Meng Qi whispered softly beside him and said with a playful smile that captivated not a few young men in the place, "Look at all those women about to drool over you. How does it feel to be popular?" Bai Zemin gave her a sidelong glance and silently appreciated his dear sister's natural beauty as he said quietly, "Don't be jealous, I'm just experiencing what it means to be popular for the first time in my life." Meng Qi covered her little mouth with one hand and her shoulders shook gently as proof that she was giggling quietly. But unlike the brother-sister duo who had already started having fun as soon as they arrived, Xietain was not happy. "I understand that these young ladies are delighted with my son and I commend them for their good taste, but what's wrong with these old ones looking at my child with those hungry tigress eyes? Don't they have any sense?" She complained under her breath. She complained quietly for fear of offending someone and causing trouble for her family. Bai Dilan didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he gently took his wife's hand and silently tried to appease her. There was no way he was going to tell Xietain that while their son was indeed young enough to be the son of several adult women present, the point here was that he was not the son of any of them. As the family of Bai Zemin settled into a corner and began chatting quietly among themselves, some of the younger girls began to murmur quietly but with astonishment noticeable on their excited faces. "Who is that young man? I don't know. There was such a handsome young man in the privileged area. Could he be the rumored Chen, he who is said to be powerful enough to take the leadership of Team Number 7 of the White Tiger Guild and so handsome that half of its female members approached him with the intention of smoothing things over?" On the other hand, the adults who knew things better and were more informed also began to whisper among themselves, "So that's Bai Zemin? Indeed, the son of Major Bai who recently appeared and turned out to be tremendously powerful. From what I heard, this Bai Zemin is the original leader of the team that Mayor Wu's daughter was a part of and who helped her get here safely. The Bai family will definitely receive privileges in the future." Bai Zemin and his father, being high-level soul evolvers, naturally heard the whispers and murmurs of the other people, but the two of them acted as if they knew nothing. At the end of the day, this kind of thing was completely normal, considering that the two of them were quite famous now. This especially applied to Bai Zemin since Bai Dilan was known from before. While Bai Dilan was already a man who had seen the world and was too old to worry about such matters, Bai Zemin was the top leader of a faction with over 30,000 survivors, so his actual state was far from what anyone inside this hall, worrying about insignificant looks or whispers, had long since been put aside by him. Time passed slowly and little by little more guests began to arrive. Approximately 30 minutes after Bai Zemin arrived, Zhongde appeared at the entrance with his mother and quickly found the location of Bai Zemin and his family. Seeing Bai Zemin gesturing for him to come closer, Zhongde did not hesitate and took his mother with him to introduce themselves. Bai Zemin's parents, especially Xietain, was very keen after hearing that Zhongde was one of the comrades who had fought shoulder to shoulder with his son all this time. Bai Zemin's mother clearly noticed the poor nutrition of Zhongde's mother, so she kindly offered to cook her various mutant vegetables with mutant meat to help in her recovery, forgetting that Zhongde with his strength could give his mother what she needed. Even so, Zhongde and his mother naturally understood the good intentions of the other party and both immediately felt grateful. Especially Zhongde, who knew who Bai Zemin really was and how prestigious Xi Linger's identity was without her knowing it. Not long after the arrival of Zhong De, two beautiful women appeared and again a small commotion was raised that somehow did not lose with the arrival of Bai Zemin. They were Nangong Lingxin and Kai Jingyi. The hot body of Nangong Lingxin was being hugged by a silver-colored Chinese dress. On both sides were two long slits that tantalizingly revealed her long legs, seducing men every time they appeared. After every step forward she took just like a supermodel on parade. In contrast, Kai Jingyi was much less striking in her beautiful light blue dress. Although she was undoubtedly more beautiful than most of the women present, her body was small when compared to a curvaceous woman like Nangong Lingxin, and walking side by side really overshadowed her. However, only Bai Zemin, Zhong De, and Nangong Lingxin knew that this was actually an effect of Kai Jingyi's assassin job passively dimming her presence. It was close to 2200 hours, but Bai Zemin still saw no sign of Wu Yijun or her family. Nor did he see Shangguan, Bing Shui or Chen He anywhere. However, after thinking it over he understood what was happening and a mocking smile appeared on his face, automatically. Bai Zemin did not know that this small gesture, without him realizing it, had stolen the heart of more than one young maiden who was secretly watching him. Suddenly, the entire hall fell silent and everyone's gaze was glued to the entrance as if attracted by a strong magnet. There, a family composed of a powerful and burly-looking man, a beautiful woman who looked about 30 to 35 years old, and finally a young woman of about 20 years old. The eyes of Bai Zemin immediately focused on the young woman as soon as he saw her and froze at the sight of her face. So this is what you call confronting the past after many years. Bai Zemin whispered in a voice only he could hear. A couple of hours ago, he said I love you to a woman. But years ago, he loved another girl. However, the girl in his memories was no longer the girl he loved, and even her appearance was no longer the same as he remembered. Even her aura had changed a lot. Chapter 629, Past Love, Feng Tianwu. The black hair of his memories was gone, now being replaced by long straight hair as fiery red as fire that fell freely in a cascade down the back of the girl who once held the most important place in Bai Zemin's heart and whom he thought of most in those days. On the other hand, those soft eyes had gained a lot more resolve and one could even see a flash of heroism and bravery flickering like a bright flame which caused the weak not to dare to keep their eyes fixed on her for too long. Her body was not as sexy as Wu Yijun's body and her proportions were closer to Shangguan Bing Shui's but slightly below in the chest area. The crimson-red dress matched her long hair and clung tantalizingly to her practically perfect body but without affecting movement at all. Without a doubt, she was the kind of woman who regardless of where she went was destined to become the center of attention. Even within this hall, only Meng Qi and Kai Jingyi could compare to her in terms of confidence and appearance, and only Nangong Lingxin surpassed her devilishly seductive body by a notch. She was the woman who years ago ruled in the mind of Bai Zemin and took over his heart. Her appearance had changed, not only had her body properly matured but even the aura surrounding her was completely different from the softness and gentleness Bai Zemin remembered. Had it not been for her face, Bai Zemin might not have recognized her at all. At the end of the day, regardless of bad or good experiences, first love was hard to forget. However, as Bai Zemin looked at this past love now, he realized something important. His heart was not shaken at all, there were no emotions revived at all. There was no anger, shame, discomfort, pressure, desire for revenge. There was nothing there. As Bai Zemin looked at Feng Tianwu now, he realized that far from hating her he was actually grateful. Because it was thanks to her that he was who he was today. After a casual glance, the eyes of Bai Zemin turned away from her and he did not give her a second glance again, despite being a little surprised by her soul strength. He and Feng Tianwu lived in different worlds even though they were both soul evolvers. Not only were their paths far from each other, but she would definitely not remember the nobody who stupidly thought he was loved. Bai Zemin's level of indifference was so high. that not only his family did not notice anything strange, but even Lilith, who was glued to him in invisible mode, did not feel the slightest change in his heart rhythm. Xietain was surprised to meet her here, he was also surprised to feel her strength, but that was all. He would not interfere in her life in any way, and she would not interfere in his. The two of them would be two complete strangers, there was no need to do any different. Look, it's the Feng family. As expected from one of the three strongest families in our establishment, the confidence in their bearing is different. Feng Tianwu is still as beautiful as ever. You dare to approach her? Forget it. Her eyes are too scary. Again, whispers and murmurs were heard for a while before everyone began to relax. The father of Feng Tianwu was named Feng Hong, and he only needed to fulfill one last requirement to evolve into the Second Order. Feng Hong was the overall leader of the Phoenix Guild and was a powerful mage focused on fire-type magic whose destructive attacks could not be ignored even by the two strongest second-order existences in the establishment. With his identity, there was no shortage of people who approached the Feng family in an attempt to forge friendships. Feng Hong, despite his serious and sturdy appearance that did not quite fit the appearance of a normal mage, seemed to be a rather friendly man as he chatted with all the guests who approached him. On the other hand, Feng Tianwu was indifferent. She didn't approach anyone, and all those brave enough to try to engage her in conversation left after realizing that each and every one of her replies was disinterested and boring. She sat in one of the farthest seats and while drinking a glass of red wine began to look around bored. The place where Xietain and the rest stood was also receiving a lot of attention, and there was no shortage of people approaching them to express goodwill. Besides, with so many women looking at him, it was impossible for Feng Tianwu not to look in that direction. However, while her eyes flashed with a hint of surprise at his appearance, she did not linger too long and simply continued to glance around the area in boredom. Time passed slowly and gradually the needles of the clock began to approach 22 o'clock in the evening. The party was slowly entering the climax as even the soft music from the beginning started to play a little louder, livening things up and urging couples to dance on the dance floor. With the first young man daring and inviting a beautiful young lady, gradually the center of the room filled with people of all ages dancing to the music, eating like kings and drinking alcohol. The fun soon reached the point where the slight tension disappeared from the bodies of all the young people. Amidst laughter and jokes, new friendships of all kinds slowly began to take shape, and this also helped the adults to relax and get closer to other families that in the past they might not have been able to get close to. Xietain and Meng Qi received many invitations to dance, but both politely declined. While Yilinger chatted with Zhongda's mother and Bai Dilan chatted with some smart big shots that after seeing the rise of the Bai family came over to say a few good words. The brother-sister duo chatted with each other quietly or laughed at each other's jokes. Zhongda was suddenly asked to dance by a girl who did not dare to ask Xietain to dance after she saw him reject young girls prettier than her. The silent Zhongda looked at his mother in concern, but under her instigation, he accepted the young beauty's invitation and headed to the dance ground. How envious I feel right now. The voice of Lilith sounded beside him even though Xietain couldn't see her. I'd love to show up and dance next to you, have fun normally. But I'm afraid that unless I take my lily form such a thing will not be possible. Xietain turned his face slightly and whispered softly, don't worry, Lilith. Believe me when I say that we will have many such parties and plenty of time to join hands and dance. Lilith could not appear at the party looking like Lily since Xietain would have no way of explaining who she was to Wu Keqian or Sun Ling. After all, the parents of Wu Yijuan already knew that only 7 of them had come from Yanqing district, and if Xietain simply told them that he happened to meet a normal human alive outside the base when there shouldn't be anyone for thousands of miles around, it would definitely raise too much suspicion. It was not the time yet. Lilith immediately calmed down when she heard the words spoken by Xietain and like an excited little girl, exclaimed in a voice that only he could hear, it's a promise. Xietain chuckled and was about to say something when he felt a slight pulling on his right sleeve. What's wrong, Meng Qi? Meng Qi looked at him with a gentle smile on her beautiful face and extended a hand forward as she slightly tilted her body and brought her other hand behind her back. Princess, may I have your hand to dance this piece? Bai Zemin was stunned for a second before he began to laugh out loud. He reached out his hand and placed it on top of his younger sister's hand as he acted shyly. Of course you may, honorable knight. The track Meng Qi chose was a slow one that was danced very close to each other. Bai Zemin naturally realized that she did it on purpose but did not understand the reason. However, he soon figured it out. Big brother, that girl from before is called Feng Tianwu. Meng Qi hesitantly whispered as she rested her head on his chest and let herself be guided by him. The girl who hurt you in the past was also called by that name. Could it be? That's her. Bai Zemin did not hide this fact as there was no need to do so in the first place. They are both the same person, truly a coincidence not to be expected. Even though she could feel his natural indifference, Meng Qi still couldn't help but ask with hatred and poison in his voice, what will you do? Take revenge? With Big Brother's strength, that Feng anything and her family will be destroyed in the blink of an eye. Girl, since when did you become this cruel? Bai Zemin asked, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Humph. Anyone who hurts you has no right to exist. Meng Qi declared as if it was natural. She's right. Lilith seemed to agree as she said with a giggle, your little sister Meng Qi already likes me. I hope I can get along with my pretty sister-in-law, hee. Sister-in-law. Bai Zemin couldn't help but feel warm when he heard the way Lilith called Meng Qi. The fact that she said such a thing meant that she really considered herself his full-fledged woman. Meng Qi, you don't need to think about Feng Tianwu or the past. He said in a soft voice. I don't hate her at all, you shouldn't hate her either. Of course, this doesn't mean we will be friends or anything like that. It's just that we will each walk our own path, our lives are meant to be lived in the heavens. And Feng Tianwu, despite being a powerful first-order mage, will never reach our heights. She is just a passenger in our lives. That's all. Meng Qi was surprised by the arrogant words of her big brother, however, after thinking about it for a moment she understood. Bai Zemin would soon become the sole ruler and king of all of China, and in the future, he might even become the emperor of Earth, considering how young he was and the power he already held. On the other hand, Feng Tianwu was really unworthy of mention. Therefore, after considering it for several seconds, she finally nodded in agreement. You are right. That Feng Tianwu woman will surely want to bang her head against the wall when she figures out what she missed. Bai Zemin chuckled and did not pursue the matter further. To him, Feng Tianwu was a case closed. She was part of his past and would always be part of his past. Bai Zemin did not immaturely deny it. However, the past was past, now he had to live for today and look forward to tomorrow. After dancing with Meng Qi, Bai Zemin took her hand and was leading her back when suddenly the music cut out and the lights dimmed a little. When he and everyone else looked toward the door to see what was going on, what he found was a group of about 5 or 6 people. But the thing in question was that when Bai Zemin's eyes landed on the first person in the group, he couldn't help but cough under his breath. Dom, you must be joking. This daddy must be cursed by the goddess of fate or something. Chapter 630 Past and Present Converge. The eyes of Bai Zemin were focused on the face of the young man located first from the left side and, coincidence or not, that young man was the first person he saw among the people in the group that had just arrived. However, a bigger coincidence was the fact that Bai Zemin knew this young man. Inky black hair brushed back with pomade, a truly handsome face, strong body, tall. Dressed in his black suit, this young man really was good-looking enough to charm the heart of any young woman, with just a smile from him. However, only those who knew him well understood that the slight smile that was always on his face carried disdain for others, arrogance, pride, and ego. Isn't this young man that little piece of sh*t surnamed Sun and named Jie? Bai Zemin was at a loss for words. Several minutes ago, Bai Zemin had met the girl he once loved even though he honestly believed they would never cross paths again. but little did Bai Zemin expect that the surprises had just begun, as apart from Feng Tianwu, he also ended up meeting Sun Jie soon after. Sun Jie was precisely the young man who in the past had been Bai Zemin's best friend and who, after teaming up with Feng Tianwu, played a bad joke on him and ended up with broken legs once Bai Zemin recovered from his depression. Why was Sun Jie in this place? Bai Zemin frowned and looked at the rest of the group that had just arrived and finally understood what was going on here. Can there really be such a coincidence in this world? My God! Bai Zemin really didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw that apart from Sun Jie and the one who seemed to be his father, there were also several people he knew very well in that group. Wu Keqian, Sun Ling, Wu Yijuan, Shangguan Bing Shui, and finally, Chen He. It was the lineup of 3 women that really took the breath away from everyone in the hall, and even Bai Zemin gasped for a moment. Wu Yijuan was wearing a purple dress so long that it covered even her feet but stopped just before touching the floor, which meant it was custom-made especially for her. The dress, despite being long, was considerably daring considering Wu Yijuan's personality, as the neckline area was black mesh-like lace, so while it didn't reveal too much, it did reveal enough to tempt anyone. Her beautiful baby face in conjunction with her seductive body and the way she was dressed caused many young men who had come with the intention of wooing her to immediately take a step back. Wu Yijuan's mother, Sun Ling, was much more daring, and somehow Bai Zemin was not surprised to see her wearing a Chinese dress similar to the one Nangong Lingxin wore, but in milk white with a black dragon on the abdomen area, and another black dragon on the chest area, an area that seemed about to explode due to the tension. She had a slight smile that exuded confidence, and not a few men received death gazes from their partners when they noticed how they looked at her. However, the one who took the crown was none other than Shangguan Bing Shui. Shangguan Bing Shui wore a night black Western-style dress that, far from being revealing, was probably one of the most conservative in the entire hall, as not only did the sleeves cover up to the elbow area but the chest area was completely covered, and the neckline was high enough to touch her small and delicate clavicle. However, even though the dress was also long enough to completely cover her long legs, barely exposing the silver high heels, there was a long slit in the front left to mid-thigh area, exposing that beautiful leg that seemed to shine under the illumination of the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Her hair, which was an intermediate between white and silver, was almost completely free, except that on her head was the crown-like treasure she obtained as a reward after partially completing the Destroyer of Destroyers mission during the invasion of the Azura race. Her delightful body was especially tempting when it was wrapped around the elegant dress, and her matching light hair and high-heeled shoes created a strong contrast when coupled with the night black of her attire. This was the second time Bai Zemin thought she managed to somehow touch Lilith's naturally suppressed charm, being the first when he first saw her smile for the first time on that night when they both went out hunting and when their friendship officially began. Literally, to say that most of the men in the place fell in love with her at first sight was not an exaggeration at all, and there were not a few older men who looked at her with the desire to possess her. The group moved forward calmly, and each of them ignored the stares of everyone, as in some way all of them were already used to being in the spotlight anywhere. This especially applied to Shangguan Bing Shui, whose face at this moment was cold and indifferent and walked like a goddess despising mortals in the middle of the crowd. Wu Keqian separated from them after reaching the back of the hall and approached the small stage that had been erected at the back. The lights dimmed even more, and once he had the desired attention, he smiled happily and said in a clear voice loud enough not to need any microphones, "First of all, thank you all for attending this party even though the announcement was too sudden. Thanks to all of you who changed your plans for tonight. As you can well see, the smile on my face should be proof of how happy I am right now. This happiness has been with me for the past 8 days and has not left me even for a second despite the difficulties mankind is facing." Wu Keqian paused for a brief moment after saying these words, so the entire hall fell silent as everyone processed the message. After a moment of silence, he continued his speech. 8 days ago, my daughter, who I honestly thought I would never see again, appeared outside the north gate of our base. Not only did she return alive, but she returned as a powerful first-order mage whose skills are top-notch. Wu Keqian smiled very proudly, as any father would be of his child's great achievements, and said aloud, "Few here know that my daughter, my most precious treasure, was studying at the distant Beijing University when the world change occurred. However, she, along with a team composed of brave young warriors, traveled tens of thousands of kilometers from Yanqing district to our Chongping district." Several voices of amazement immediately rose when the people in the hall heard the words Beijing University and Yanqing district. The distance between such points and Chongping district was colossal, not to mention the difficulty one would have to experience to get from that place to here. The amazement of everyone came from the fact that, although Wu Keqian did not say it explicitly, his daughter and her team must have broken through one of the most dangerous areas in the entire country to get here in less than 3 months. Followed by amazement, however, admiration naturally came over the majority of those present, and without being asked by Wu Keqian, the people began to applaud as they nodded to each other and quietly chanted words of praise for Wu Yijun and his team. Ha ha ha. Mayor Wu, Miss Yijun sure has a sense of leadership to be able to lead a group of people through the Eastern Dragon's back. Like father, like daughter, I guess. Ha ha ha. A pot-bellied man who owned several businesses in the most popular streets of the establishment stepped forward and praised loudly. The pot-bellied man's words naturally drew several nods from other adults, but only people like Feng Hong, Sun Yun, Sun Ling, Bai Dilan, and a handful of others knew the truth. Actually my daughter was not the leader of this small team of young warriors. Wu Keqian shook his head. Wasn't it Miss Wu? Who else then? Could it be a second-order warrior? You? Do you really think second-order humans grow like cabbages by the roadside, or what? The expression on Bai Zemin's face changed slightly as he heard the whispers and noticed everyone's confused expressions. He somehow already saw what was about to happen coming. In fact, Wu Keqian was such a righteous man that he not only did not allow his daughter to keep the honor that did not belong to her, but kindly pointed to Bai Zemin, who was standing next to Meng Qi in the middle of the crowd. Young friend Bai Zemin, I wonder if you wouldn't mind coming here and telling a little bit about the hard battles you guys had to go through to get this far? Wu Keqian said in a soft voice, before sighing as he looked at Bai Zemin with practically pleading eyes. While Wu Keqian knew that to get here many of Bai Zemin's comrades had to have died on the journey, what Wu Keqian wanted to do was to open the eyes of all the people who lived in the privileged area and had forgotten the danger of the outside world. In fact, this was another reason why he organized this party in the first place. Bai Zemin understood the thoughts of Wu Keqian and praised him in his heart. However, the attention he was receiving now that he had become the center of everyone's eyes subconsciously caused him to frown slightly before his expression relaxed. There was no need to worry about anything, and if the worst came to the worst, then he would simply beat it to a pulp, since there was no one present capable of stopping him anyway. With leisurely steps, he walked over to the stage, but not before looking at Meng Qi and whispering something in her ear. Feng Tianwu frowned slightly when she heard the name Bai Zemin, but when she saw who the advancing person was, she shook her head as if she had confirmed something. On the other hand, Sun Jie's expression sank when he heard that name, as if the words Bai Zemin were linked to bad memories. Moreover, when he followed the eyes of everyone and saw the woman he was courting but was ordered to stay away from being so close to another man, something inside him began to boil. He followed Bai Zemin's silhouette with his eyes, and the more he looked at him the more he felt like he knew him from somewhere, so he focused on trying to remember from where. Everyone watched with different emotions as Bai Zemin stepped onto the small stage and looked at Wu Keqian silently, as if he was asking him what he was supposed to do now. Wu Keqian patted his shoulder friendly and said, looking at the crowd, "This little friend here is called Bai Zemin, and he is barely 20 years old right now. He, like my daughter Yijun, was at Beijing University when that strange something that calls itself soul record changed this world forever." Wu Keqian was giving a short introduction about Bai Zemin. He even mentioned who his father was and his amazing achievement of taking the position of leader of one of the Black Turtle Guild's teams, conveniently leaving out the fact that the team Xietain led was actually an incomplete team that was not officially listed yet. However, there came a point when two people in the crowd were no longer listening. The first person was Feng Tianwu. She frowned when she heard the age and the place where the young man in front of her studied. She had met a Xietain in the past, and because of juvenile stupidities, she did something she had always wanted to apologize for. However, that Xietain left for Beijing University to study, so Feng Tianwu never had the chance to see him again. It was just that Feng Tianwu did not believe that the Xietain of the past and the Xietain in front of her were the same person, since the appearance of this Xietain was simply transcendental compared to the at best average appearance of the Xietain of her memories. The other person was none other than Sun Jia. However, in contrast to Feng Tianwu, when Sun Jia looked at the black eyes of the handsome man on the stage, his entire body trembled like crazy, and a distant memory resurfaced from his mind, causing both of his legs to tremble as if a great deal of pain suddenly assaulted him.